As we come to the end of 3 weeks of the worst war in Europe since World War II, most of the Washington press corps seems to have finally emerged from a fixation on a fantasy, the fantasy of a no-fly zone. For 2 days in a row now, at the White House press briefing, the words no-fly zone have not appeared in a single question. Most reporters in the White House and the Congress are generalists. They are not experts in any particular policy area, and they have to be ready to ask questions at any time about anything from corporate taxation to healthcare to gas prices to now war with a nuclear superpower. And so, with many of them covering their first war, it was almost forgivable for the first 24 hours or so when reporters used the phrase no-fly zone without realizing that no-fly zone actually means aerial combat zone in which pilots on both sides are shot down and sent to their deaths. In other words, trying to impose a no-fly zone in a hot war with a nuclear superpower means war. By now, 3 weeks in, reporters using the phrase no-fly zone in their questions are unintentionally revealing themselves to be fantasists. A no-fly zone is enforced by shooting down everything that dares to fly into the so-called no-fly zone. And the aircraft flying into the so-called no-fly zone will be trying to shoot down whatever and whoever is shooting at them. A no-fly zone has never been enforced against any major military power in the history of never. I made that point repeatedly on this program in the first days of the war, and as reality about so-called no-fly zones began to spread, people who supported the idea in the first week of the war stopped short of supporting it in the second week of the war, and more stopped supporting it in the third week of the war because they could see that it simply meant an increase in aerial combat, which would be regarded by Vladimir Putin as an American escalation of the war in Ukraine. And as we head into another weekend with the Sunday shows being dominated by Ukraine, there might still be a question or two about a no-fly zone. Do you support a no-fly zone is the wrong question. It reeks of a childish misunderstanding of war and aerial combat. What the questioners should ask is, do you support sending American pilots into aerial combat with Russian pilots over Ukraine? The right follow-up question to anyone saying that they do support that is, do you support American pilots attacking Russian ground support systems for Russian aircraft, even though those ground support systems are in Russia? And for anyone who advocates any of this, a question that must be asked and has completely been ignored is, what is the legal basis for American pilots shooting down Russian pilots? Because currently, there is no legal basis for anyone in the American military to shoot anything at Russians anywhere. And so that leads to this question. Do you support a congressional declaration of war against Russia as a legal basis for American pilots to shoot down Russian pilots? And to any member of Congress, the follow-up should be, when are you going to introduce a congressional declaration of war against Russia in the House or the Senate? Now, these are all reality-based questions about the fantasy of a no-fly zone. To ask about a no-fly zone as if it's something that is possible to achieve in the middle of a hot war with a nuclear superpower is the same as asking about achieving a no-snow zone in Alaska. And of course, there is also the mandatory hypothetical question about escalation. If the American military starts killing the Russian military in the sky or on the ground, do you think Vladimir Putin will go nuclear with either short-range tactical weapons in Ukraine or long-range nuclear weapons targeting New York City and Washington, D.C.? And it's also worth asking that member of Congress if he or she represents a place that is high on Vladimir Putin's nuclear target list in the United States. The last time Europe was at war in World War II, when Russia was on our side, President Franklin Roosevelt did not have to wrestle with fantasy questions from the press corps. And we were not able to achieve a no-fly zone over our European allies in World War II until Hitler killed himself and Germany surrendered.
Well, from a U.S. perspective, our President Biden, has been clear that we would not have U.S. forces fighting in Ukraine. Having said that, we'll do everything within our power to support Ukraine in their efforts to defend their territory. We've also stated that enforcing a no-fly zone actually means that you're in combat. You're in a fight with Russia, and that's one of the things that we have said that our president has said that we weren't going to do, get in a fight with Russia. So what this really means is that in order to control the skies, you have to shut down the air defenses that are on the ground, and some of those air defense systems are in Russia, and so again, there's no easy or simple way to do this. There's no such thing as a no-fly zone light. A no-fly zone means that you're in a conflict with Russia. So from a U.S. perspective, again, our position remains that we're not going to do that.